Thank you all so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Thanks for also bearing with us in this packed room. We were originally supposed to be downstairs, but had some scheduling challenges this morning, so we're up here. Really appreciate you bearing with us. We have the AC on, so hopefully it starts to cool down a little bit in here. To start off, my name is Emma. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been organizing with Sunrise here in Providence for about the last year. And I'm so excited to see you all here today to talk more about 2020 elections and how Sunrise and Working Families Party are gearing up to completely transform Rhode Island politics as we know it next year. So really appreciate seeing so many new faces and so many old ones. And we're going to get a chance to get to know each other a little bit later. In the agenda, we're going to start off right now with just kind of like an opening overview where Sunrise and Working Families Party are going to share a little bit about how we think about elections as a brief orientation to how we're thinking about this event. We're then going to have an amazing panel with these 5 wonderful panelists in front of me. And then we're going to have a time to break out into small groups with each of the 5 panelists to ask them more questions in kind of a smaller setting and also get to know each other and talk a little bit more about how we envision being involved and active in 2020. So while you're listening to the panel, maybe take some time to think about if there's someone up here who is experienced you particularly connect with or want to know more about, and you can go to their breakout group when we break out later on. And then finally, we're all just going to come back together and do like a brief little closing together. Cool. So first, I'm going to kick it off to Georgia, who's going to talk a little bit more on Working Families Party's perspective on what the problem that we're facing right now is.
Hey everyone, I'm Georgia Helsman. I'm the state director for the Rhode Island Working Families Party, and no longer a young person involved in politics, but I started when I was 19, so I remember a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about what the problem is, and I think it probably, hopefully it won't be too much of a surprise to everyone. So first of all, this is a really important preference. Rhode Islanders actually share our values. This chart happens to be from a poll we did a few years ago on economic justice issues, but we can put up a similar chart around reproductive rights issues, around environmental issues, and you'll see across the board when you ask voters, and these are current voters, right? This is not like, imagine if everybody who could be mobilized into the electorate was. These are consistent voters. You see something like 90% support for paid sick days, upward about 70% support for $15 an hour minimum wage, higher even than that for taxing the rich, and high support also, the other ones up here are 2 years of free college and expanding paid family and medical leave. I want to talk about paid sick days for a minute because I'm one of the people in this room who has deep experience around that particular fight. Not the only one, but we fought like hell for a year to get that passed. We sent thousands and thousands of postcards. We spent lots of time at the State House, and we finally got a compromise version of it passed, which I am incredibly proud of. Incredibly proud of. It should not have been so hard. 90% of Rhode Islanders supported paid sick days. In fact, 90% of Rhode Islanders supported the poll question was about 7 paid sick days. The law we finally got passed just now this year has gotten people up to 5. And you could tell a similar story about the legislative victory in the last year around women's reproductive health care, right? Incredibly important victory, incredibly hard fought, lots of people did real amazing work on that. Should not have been so hard. Over 70% of Rhode Islanders supported that from the get-go. So let's start with this really important premise. The people actually are with us. And essentially the government is not. A vicious cycle keeps our values for the most part out of government. And I want to talk a little bit about how we think about it and how things like this are key to changing that. So here's how I would envision the vicious cycle. First, politicians are out of touch. Nobody will be super surprised to hear that. The folks up here excluded, but for the most part, politicians are out of touch with what lots of people want, right? So 2 things happen when that is the case. Both politics is icky, right? It does not feel good to want to participate. And also, your government actually doesn't deliver that much that's real and meaningful in people's lives. That makes it even easier for people to tune out, and no wonder given those things. And when people tune out, people do not run for public office. And when they don't run for public office, people who share our values don't win public office, and we're right back with more politicians who don't share our values in public office again.
What I have is not a question, it's just a suggestion. I can't really see anything.
Do you want the lights off?
No. Do you guys want to like?
Yeah.
I imagine if I can't see and I'm sitting in the front, probably you guys can't see, right? All right, cool.
Does anybody want a chair over here?
We'll just shuffle it a little bit.
Can you see now?
We'll shuffle back.
Can everyone see now? All right, great. Do you need me to go? You want me to go back to the slide? Okay. So that's the vicious cycle. We at WFP think about our work as about reversing this cycle, and we're really excited about the work we're doing together with Sunrise because we think that they see it pretty similarly. Here's how it goes. We're about changing this cycle. Starts in a totally different place. Starts with good people tuning in, right? Starts with actual organizing of people into politics. It doesn't start with like what kind of politicians we have. Starts with how can we actually get people active and mobilized. Then you have the real opportunity of great candidates stepping forward. Not obviously a given, it's hard to run for office, as I'm sure people up here will tell you, so that's a big choice, but much easier if you have good people tuning in. We actually elect real champions for working people and for the climate justice we all need. That only happens when good people run for office. By the way, we've done a fair amount of like work figuring this out. It's not that progressive folks, women and people of color lose elections more often, they just tend to run less. So they win as often as their old white male counterparts, sometimes more often when they actually run, but we don't have the depth of bench of the kinds of candidates we would want to begin. And we actually have a great track record of electing great champions. Then we have politicians who can advocate for bold change and deliver at least some of the time, right? Even having great champions in elective office doesn't magically fix the problem. There'll still be some bad folks. We'll still have to fight for what we want, but it gives you a fighting chance. And then politics has some purpose, and government is actually starting to deliver real and meaningful benefits for people's lives. So that's it. Like, that's basically the theory, right? Like, this is not super complicated. Except for this, it's that cycle piece we could talk about anywhere in the country. And I think we should be really clear that Rhode Island is actually an especially exciting place for electoral work. And we should have really big ambitions here. Races are relatively small. People with a few good, organized friends and volunteers can run for office. You don't have to be somebody who like has a well-organized political machine before you even step into running for office. So it's possible for community activists, for young people, for people from all kinds of backgrounds to run and actually win. And remember, the voters are actually on our side. And we have so that means when we actually have great candidates run for office, we have a great track record of winning elections, when we have good candidaes and when we run smart campaigns. So we ought to be really ambitious, and I would put it this way, people with our values, they ought to run the state of Rhode Island. And the only reason we're not yet is because we haven't had enough people run and done the work to win those elections. So that literally is why elections are important and why they're especially important in Rhode Island. If we were having this conversation in Iowa, we might have a different conversation about like what is actually possible, or like do enough people share our values, but that's not the case here. We have the base. It's about creating the political opportunity to make that base win. We have a great track record, I said this. What do we need to do to get there? I just want to be really clear. There are a couple of different elements. First, a much bigger base of organized volunteers. I think people who've been candidates in this room would probably say the hardest thing about running a campaign is getting people to come out and help you, and not having enough of those people, especially if we're going to start to have more candidates, right? That requires more volunteer, more men and women out. Exceptional candidates, especially in key districts. This is not a given. It's a big deal to run for office. and a bigger cadre of people who know how to run smart political campaigns. So I'll talk a little bit later about particularly what WP is doing about this, but this is a really key piece. You have a bunch more people run for office. You need a bunch more people who actually know how to do this work. And a growing alignment around a bold agenda, which is part of why we're so excited about working with Sunrise and other groups to start to articulate what is it that we really want through this election process. So I think that's it. That's all the slides I have. Go ahead, Emma.
I'm gonna kick it back to, you have one more.
I do.
A set of clear demands.
Oh, a set of clear demands. Look at that. I added that because I think it's very important, right? Like it's not just the general things we want, but like here's what we actually expect to get done.
Cool, and we at Sunrise definitely see one of those key demands as a Green New Deal, which not going to get into super in depth right now about what that vision looks like, but we'll do a major plug that if you're interested in learning more and thinking about that, we're going to have some orientation trainings coming up in November where you can really dive into the Green New Deal and the strategy behind that. But want to give a quick overview of kind of why Sunrise thinks about elections and sees this as an important part of our strategy. So essentially, it's because we see it as being essential to like the 3 key ingredients that we see as necessary in order to win power. So can I just have people like read out one by one what each of these are? Can anybody read what people power is? Yeah.
People power. Build an army of young people that has the ability to mobilize millions.
Yeah, exactly. So this looks like getting millions of people out in the streets, striking from school, striking from work. Yeah, building the mass of people behind this movement. Could someone read out what political power is? I want to do it.
Political power. Elect a critical mass of enthusiastically, supportive public officials who are ready to fight for our generation.
Thanks for doing it all the way from that angle. Yeah, exactly. And so that looks like the enthusiastically supportive public officials, many of whom are like sitting on this panel today, who will go into office and fight with everything they have to put our values into practice and champion things like the Green New Deal. And then the last one is a little bit trickier to understand, and like again, we go more into this in like the orientation training, but if anyone can read out what a people's alignment is. Yeah.
The People's Alignment, a group of political and social movements that will advance a shared agenda for society united for the dignity and well-being of all people that will.
Sorry, that was my bad. Forget the last that will. Cool. Yeah, so just briefly to go into like why we see needing each of these. So this is a quote from Barack Obama's primary victory speech, where he's essentially saying that when we look back generations from now, we're going to tell our children that this was the moment when the rise of the oceans began to slow and our planet began to heal. So yeah, like looking at this quote, this kind of shows that we can't always trust the fate of climate action and action on like a lot of bold progressive issues to politicians who say that they're with us. And that even if a politician's great on many things, like we still need an organized group of people who are going to push them when they're in office to kind of create the change that we need. And then alternatively, why we need political power, I think kind of looking back to 2016, leading up to that time, People Power gave us huge turnout at the People's Climate March, massive protests against major fossil fuel infrastructure, and tons of like divestment from funding at colleges and universities from fossil fuels. But nevertheless, even in 2016, when political power kind of wasn't a part of the climate movement strategy, we lost in a really huge way. And then finally, the People's Alignment is just based on the fact that we know that one organization alone doesn't have the power to enact the sweeping change that we need, and that it's going to take a lot of movements coming together in order to enact that. So essentially, we see elections as key to winning that political power and getting those enthusiastically supportive public officials in office, but also using it as an opportunity to build that people power through getting people out and canvassing and coming together as a movement around elections when people are particularly attuned to issues and wanting to talk about these things at the doors, that we can build this huge movement. And also connect with other organizations like Working Families Party. Elections can be an opportunity to show up in solidarity for other groups and issues. Yeah, so essentially that's why elections are a key part of our strategy, and in the coming year and a half, Sunrise is going to be kind of oriented around this idea of organize, vote, and strike. So we're kind of in the organizing period right now and striking with the large student climate strike that happened back in September, and we're gearing up for another massive one in December on the 6th. And then we're going to be oriented around the 2020 elections, and we know that young people are the largest voting bloc in this country, that we need to turn out in massive numbers, but that even if we have amazing results in 2020, we're still going to need to keep politicians' feet to the fire in 2021 to make sure that they pass the Green New Deal. So that comes back to strike. So we're envisioning massive strikes starting in 2021 in order to get that agenda passed. So yeah, to kind of briefly go through aiming towards this like moment of mass non-cooperation with strikes as fitting in really in key ways to our strategy around elections. Cool, so that's like a little bit, very brief overview of what Sunrise has planned. Essentially, we're going to be doing a lot of organizing, we're going to be turning out young people to vote in 2020, and then we're going to be striking to make sure that our vision for a Green New Deal and a more just and equitable society actually gets put into place.
Great, I'll pop back in to just say a couple quick things about priorities. So as we're gearing up for 2020, first organize and build the base for working families' values in government. So this is individuals who want to build like the party of our dreams, like the political home where we can all believe in all these big, bold ideas and actually fight for them and win in the political arena. So please join us. You can do that by text message, you can do it in person. You're going to get a bunch of handout with resources, but focusing on individuals and organizing people to put working families first. Training campaign leaders, we'll talk about this a little bit more too, but we're in the middle of this Working Families Campaign School that we invite you all to be part of, trying to teach people everything that we know about how to run great campaigns, the kind of campaigns that can win surprising victories and take folks by surprise. And then last, building smart, this is really next year, building smart campaigns from the ground up, working directly with candidates and campaigns to make sure that they build the kind of strategy that can actually get them through election day and out on top. That's it.